Hi everyone. I just read an article that came out of Australia discussing the attitudes and the behaviors of 15-year-olds due to exposure to explicit sexual imaging and pornography, and how that affects their relationships and the gap between the expectations of boys and girls of each other. It just sounded really sad, where basically the short version of it is girls felt pressured to perform according to the way they thought the boys wanted them to perform, and the boys wanted them to perform the way they saw in pornography models performing on demand and without respect. Anyhow, it was just kind of a sad story, but it got me thinking about the issues around sexuality in a society, especially in this society. I come from Bulgaria, a communist country, and one of the side effects of communism, probably the only positive side effect of communism, is that religion was not allowed. And usually it's religion that moralizes behaviors and that mandates what's acceptable and unacceptable in interactions between people. So you have a society that has very weak or non-existent religious influence, and a society that, in this case, communist society, that sees everybody as equal, men and women. Women had to work just as much as men had to work because everybody had to contribute. So you get a sense of empowerment in the women, and you get a sense of a different perception of sexuality and expression of sexuality when you have that kind of openness and egalitarian feelings around gender roles. So yeah, we did walk around the beaches topless. That was like no problem. Nobody cared. It's pretty much acceptable. It's like, who cares? Women can breastfeed. Nobody raises a fuss. It's how you raise babies. You breastfeed them and do that in public if you want. It's normal. Anyway, so it got me thinking, like, why is America so different? And we consider ourselves the land of the free, except around sexuality. It's like a whole bunch of nightmare. So I started thinking about some of the puritanical, Calvinistic, and Protestant roots, sort of like this ancestral memory of suffering before pleasure. Stay here, work hard, when you're down on your knees, might as well scrub the floor kind of mentality, and pleasure is frowned upon, and you're gonna get your pleasure in the next life if they let you go through the pearly gates, and then you get to stand around God and listen to angels. And I don't know how that's pleasurable. I think that's boring, but I probably go to hell for saying this. So this country, 70% of the people, I'm like quoting statistics from the top of my head, but I think it's about 70% of the people in this country belong to a religion. So there is no religion in the world that thinks that free sexual expression is okay. There's a lot of moralizing around sexuality, which is why it took this long for gay rights to win the battle. And now it's the transgender people that have to win the bathrooms. So you have that legacy, ancestral legacy in thinking in people who want to be sexually free. But because of that ancestral memory and that ingrained cultural thinking, you get very poor sexual education. So young people grow up with inadequate sexual education. They know how the body parts work, but they don't know how to be in a sexual relationship. They don't know how to be a sexual being, how to find their sexual self-expression in a healthy way. So we end up with weird behaviors. And then we end up having to outlaw behaviors. So in most states, prostitution is illegal. Every time you try to outlaw behavior, you get an increase of the behavior and also an amplification of the behavior itself, like what happened during Prohibition. It's like, can you stamp out alcohol? No, you just ended up with people making underground clubs, and that's where you went to listen to the best music, have the best booze, and have the best time. And you can have a distillery in the backyard. So now you live in a culture, 70% of the people are religious to some degree or another. in which sense sex is in a way frowned upon and in some shape or form is considered sinful. And at the same time, you're bombarded with sexual images. Sex sells everything. Sex sells cars, potato chips. Sex sells yoga pants. It's like, why do your yoga pants need to be sexy? Why do your yoga tops need to be sexy? You're just doing yoga, which basically means you're rolling around the ground getting sweaty. It's like, why does your sneakers need to be sexy? It's like, what the hell? Everything has to be sexy, but you can't be a freely sexual human being without feeling judgment, either by others or self-judgment, without some degree of guilt or shame if you think you're not normal in some way. Why is that? It's just totally counterproductive to a good society. So, for example, Helen Fisher, a cultural anthropologist who studies love and sexuality, and she's the scientist behind the testing for Match.com, how to find people that match together. Published author, basically identified 3 brain systems that have evolved in the human being, in the human organism, through the thousands of years of there being humans, that produce different effects. So the first brain system is lust, and it's based on testosterone, and it's based on estrogen. So lust drives you around, scanning the environment, looking for hot butts out there, you know, being attracted to various people, sort of checking out your options and wanting to get it on with someone. And then the second brain system, which is actually the attraction or the romantic involvement brain system, is based on 3 neurotransmitters: adrenaline, dopamine, and serotonin. So that's why when you're in love, your brain ain't functioning because you're crazy. You're like possessed with that person. You're scamming, plotting how to get together, what you're going to say, what's going to happen when you get together. And then when you do get together, you have high feelings of reward. The dopamine kicks in. It's kind of like cocaine. You're elated. It's addictive. Everybody wants to be romantically involved. The movie industry knows that. In every movie, there's the couple that romantically somehow end up together. And, you know, the prince always marries the girl and happily ever after. That's the romantic system. That narrows your options down to one person. Like, you're out there scanning the environment with a heart on. And then you find one person and that becomes your focus. And that's when the dopamine, the serotonin, and the adrenaline kick in. And so now this one person is your chosen person for procreation, evolutionary speaking. So like, that's the person you get it on with. And then as soon as you have an orgasm, 2 hormones kick in, oxytocin and vasopressin. And so now you want to cuddle. And now you are attached to this person, and that system evolved so you can form a pair bond and raise your offspring that you just made if you weren't wearing a condom. Anyway, also, those 2 hormones are responsible for mothers bonding to their babies. And they have found out through experiments on animals that when you suppress the production of oxytocin, the mothers will abandon their offspring. They don't care for them. It's too much work. I don't understand why any human wants to raise a baby. They cry, they smell funny. It's like a lot of work. You know why? Because oxytocin makes you want to stay with them. You're attached to them. And then the vasopressin makes the pair bond stronger. So the dominant part of the pair bond, the male usually, wants to protect the female and therefore protect their offspring and protect their offspring. So it's very interesting. So we've evolved these brain systems. They're constantly active within us. And sex is a great vehicle for getting those things going. And so if you don't understand these things, like if you're not educated about these things, you don't know what you're feeling. You don't know if you're being lustful, if you're being romantic, if you're being attached to someone, maybe you're attached to the wrong person. Things get confusing. They get very messy in your head. People coming together for the wrong reasons. Like one's going into it because they feel lust and they go and they want to get laid, and the other one thinks that they're in love or they're looking for a life partner. These are different priorities and leads to drama when people don't align with each other, unnecessary suffering. When you don't understand what drives you, and if you don't understand what drives the other person, so then sexual expression turns into a messy subject. It's like feelings of guilt and shame and remorse, or you want to get at the other person, so you go have sex with somebody else, or I mean, it's just crazy the kinds of things people do because of uninformed sexual decisions and uneducated sexual expression. It's like, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling this? What does it mean? We put meanings in places where probably they don't belong. It's like, this person wants to have sex with you. You think that means they love you. Well, maybe it doesn't. Or you want to have sex with somebody and they think you love them, then you're in trouble. So interesting situation there. So again, inadequate sex education for young people that does not give them the skills and the room to understand themselves and how to be in a sexual relationship or any other kind of intimate relationship with another person. You can be intimate with somebody and not have sex. You don't always have to have sex. But sometimes people think it's the only option. So you end up with a whole bunch of people having sex that they don't want to have sex. And you're like, how's that even possible? You end up with 70% of the women out there say that they don't get orgasms. What does that mean? Are the guys that terrible that women can't get orgasms? Or are the women that difficult to please? Well, I don't know. I mean, I never had that problem. But research says it's mental. It's like women are too preoccupied with what's going on. It's like, am I good enough? Does my partner like what I'm doing? Is my butt big enough? Does he love me? Or what does it mean? And it's just, the brain is going. So as long as your brain is really busy, your other parts can't function as well. So you need to calm down the brain and maybe you'll get an orgasm. Maybe it is really the guy. Guys have their own issues. You know, some of them they can't get it on for different reasons, medications, illness, same thing, preoccupied in the brain. You know, all kinds of things can happen to both sexes. So, you know, how do you define intimacy? How do you find, when do you have sex? Should you have sex? What kind of a relationship is this? We don't know. We're not educated. It takes people getting adults, sometimes getting divorced and doing all kinds of stuff before they realize that they can do better. So know yourself, know what you like, know how you like it, communicate, avoid some of the drama that way. Don't use people as props. I think one of the effects of this kind of a disjointed sex is bad, but sex sells everything, confusing mixed messages, is that people start experimenting out there and they go into the self-gratification mode, start using other people as props. They actually don't consider what their actions are doing to the other person. They just want to taste this, touch this, and it leads to terrible things like pornography, the biggest industry in the world, and worse in other countries because this society compared to other societies is not as bad. But why is it that during the recession, people don't have money to pay for their mortgages, but they're spending thousands of dollars, some of them on porn? It's like, how's that even possible? Why is the sex trade even possible? It's because people are trying to satisfy sexual urges that they don't think they can in other ways. Or anyway, there's all kinds of psychological crap that goes behind it, but there wouldn't be an industry if there wasn't demand for it. So the fact that there's people demanding something means somebody's going to find out a way to provide it. And so what that means is sex trade and pornography. And that's just terrible. So can't use people as props, and be smart about who you choose and how you choose your partners. A lot of what goes on in the sexuality department is as people try to figure out what they want to do, they find themselves in certain social circles. And sometimes the social circle has a lot to do with how you end up being. So, you know, what are those social circles? Are those really the places you want to be in? It's like, what drives you to be there? Are you aware of sexually transmitted disease? Are you protecting yourself? What drives you to do what you do? There are serious implications of sexual behavior, STD being one of them. Unwanted pregnancies. If you're experimental and you're not paying attention and you're not doing this skillfully and you're just doing it for the wrong reasons, unwanted pregnancies, that's a huge social cost and a social implication. Not to mention the drama that comes from all these things. Ruins your life sometimes, puts you in a place of stress and distress. So sex can be a wonderful thing if you are comfortable with yourself, if you know who you are, if you know what you like, if you're responsible, if you're responsive to your other partner, if you're respectful, if you're communicating properly. And it can be a terrible thing if you're just out there like a kid in a candy store, can't satiate yourself because you don't know which end is up and you don't know your ass from your elbow. So it could be a terrible thing. I mean, you're messing with some powerful brain chemicals. So, what drives sexual behavior? Hormones is one thing. You got to differentiate, what's coming from hormones, what's coming from other priorities in life. Are you in a place where you're looking for a life partner or getting married or having kids? Like, where are you coming from? Early childhood development has a lot to do with how you feel and want sexuality. Even bad things like abuse can lead people to addictive sexual behavior. Or they don't know any other way to connect with people but sexually, and it can be very confusing for other people and can be very damaging for them. Early exposure to explicit sexual content, like age-inappropriate exposure to explicitly sexual content, can do a number on the person because they develop expectations they can't meet in regular life. And maybe also links to feelings of guilt and shame, and that can be one of the reasons why people don't get orgasms, right? So sexuality is the big topic. Unfortunately, a lot of it is still a taboo. People don't have very many platforms where they can explore, express in a healthy way. And even sometimes they think they're doing it in a healthy way and it's not. They don't spend enough time learning about themselves first before they start spending time experimenting in crazy ways with sexuality. It's like, you got to know who you are and what drives you before you go out there and start mixing chemicals with people and swapping sweat and bodily fluids. So just a few thoughts basically is what I wanted to share. An interesting statistics is that it takes 90 seconds to 4 minutes for us to decide who we fancy. So basically, like, you can walk into a room and in 90 seconds to 4 minutes, you've decided that this one person is wonderful. You don't know anything about them. They could be a mass murderer. And you're like, I want this person, right? So just think these things a little bit through, you don't have to act on all your impulses. But also explains love at first sight. And then 2 years later, they break up. Anyway, just a few thoughts. Have a good one.